And I know we always have a few guests here on Sunday mornings, but for those of you that have been with us the last few weeks, you may recall that we are in a series of worship themes centering in and around the life of the Apostle Peter, one of those almost larger-than-life personalities in the Scriptures, a person who became an incredible leader in the early church, someone that we probably remember as a great man of faith, a great leader, someone who was one of the original followers of Jesus Christ, and bore witness to that in the New Testament, both through his own personal recollections and the parts of the New Testament he wrote, as well as others. What sometimes we forget is Peter, though, was a man in so many ways just like you and I. He was a person who experienced the highs and lows and everything in between of what it means to be human. And even in his relationship with Jesus Christ, it wasn't all smooth sailing. In fact, Peter is the one whose epic failure is really recorded for all to see in the Scriptures. We've been looking at the life of Peter, asking a simple question, not so much what did he say, what did he do, but who was this guy, and what were the events and the circumstances that helped shape who he was. One of those defining moments we talked about last week. You see, in the night in which Jesus Christ died on Calvary's cross, and he needed his closest followers most, they all left him. Peter took it to a whole new level. Peter, when given the opportunity to bear witness to the fact that he was a disciple, a follower of Jesus Christ, on the night in which Jesus Christ faced his own crucifixion, Peter not once, not twice, but 3 times denied that he even knew Jesus. And as the story was transpired, and Jesus having already predicted to Peter that this would happen, and that when the rooster crowed the morning of the crucifixion day, that at that point Peter would have denied Jesus 3 times. Peter heard that rooster crow, and the Bible says he went out and wept bitterly. So filled with humiliation, so disappointed in himself, so ashamed that he could do nothing but cry. Why is that story in the Bible? After all, failure is not something we like talking about. As I mentioned before, when was the last time you sent a postcard to somebody saying, congratulations on your failure? If you've ever received one of those, it probably wasn't much appreciated because we don't like to be reminded about failure. And there's Peter's story, though, for the whole world to see. In fact, it's recorded in all 4 of the gospel writings. So if you miss it in John, if you miss it in Matthew, you're going to pick it up in Mark or Luke. It's there for all the world to see. And it's there for a reason. Because Peter's story intersects with your story and my story. Because at some point in time, whether we like to admit it or not, we're going to blow it. We're going to make a mistake. We're going to make a decision contrary to even what we thought we would make. You see, Peter really thought he was committed. Peter really believed that he was a follower of Jesus Christ, and he committed to follow Jesus Christ to the death. And yet when that opportunity came for him to actually put legs to that decision and prove the point, he failed. Well, we can't call it any other thing. It's failure. But failure is a part and parcel of the disciple of Jesus Christ. What do we do when we face those moments when failure becomes a reality? When our weakness overrules our strength? When our lack of faith overrules our faith? When those times come when, well, we choose to go a different path other than the path that we thought we had the strength to carry? How do we deal with that? That's an experience we all share. This is why Peter's story is in the Bible. Today we're going to pick up the story. We're going to pick up the other half of the story. Last week we looked at the dynamic of Peter's decision and sought to set her into his shoes and began to turn the corner this week. I want to ask a simple question. How do you get through that? How do you get past that? Well, let me suggest to you that at this point in time, we're not alone. Peter went off and wept bitterly, but he began to discover that God was not finished with him yet. And that Jesus was still going to pursue a relationship with him, even though in Peter's mind, he had let Jesus down in a way that no one could possibly ever forgive or look past again. In Peter's mind, it was done. It was over. The relationship was irreparably severed, and there was no turning back from what he had done. How did God go about allowing Peter to move through that? Because we do know that at some point Peter did become the incredible man of faith and the incredible person that gave such incredible faithful leadership to the early church. Well, allow me to read, before we look at the main passage today, I want to set it up by showing what Jesus did first. We read this story. This happens a week or two after Peter's denial. Jesus has been crucified. He's risen from the grave. And he's beginning to visit around with his followers because there's some unfinished business he has to undertake and to teach and to do some things before he ultimately ascends into heaven. This is how the story goes. Later, Jesus appeared again to the disciples beside the Sea of Galilee. This is how it happened. Several of the disciples were there. Simon Peter, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples. Simon Peter said, "I'm going fishing." Okay? You know, when you don't know what else to do, just do what you know. Peter was a fisherman, so he said, "I'm going fishing." "We'll come too," they all said. So they went out in the boat, but they caught nothing all night. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. He called out, "Fellows, have you caught any fish?" "No," they replied. Then he said, "Throw out your net on the right side of the boat." This is my right. This is your right. My right. "And you'll get some." So they did, and they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. Now, these fishermen have been in this predicament before. And the exact same thing has happened. And the last time that they encountered this night of fishless fishing, this same thing had happened. This stranger had walked up on the shore and said, "Throw your net over there." And they're thinking, okay, why not? They throw it in and the same thing happens. All of a sudden the nets are bursting with fish. So at this point in time, instantaneously, they recognize who it is that's standing on the shore. Because they've been here before. And that's how the story goes. The disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Lord." And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, for he had stripped for work, jumped into the water, and headed to shore. You know, most people remove some clothing before they jump into water. Peter, who knows? The others stayed with the boat and pulled the loaded net to the shore, for they were about 100 yards from the shore. And when they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them, fish cooking over a charcoal fire and some bread. "Bring some of the fish you've just caught," Jesus said. So Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net to the shore, and there were 153 large fish, and yet the net hadn't torn. Now, did they stop and count the fish? It's always incredible to me the things the Holy Spirit think are important to do. I don't know. But for whatever, they knew exactly how many fish they caught. 153. And Jesus said, "Okay, we'll add those in. We're going to cook breakfast." Now he says, "Now come and have some breakfast," Jesus said. None of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" For they knew it was the Lord. And then Jesus served them the bread and the fish. This was the 3rd time Jesus had appeared to his disciples since he had been raised from the dead. Now we're going to pick up the story in just a minute, particularly as it relates to Peter. But as we talk about not only Peter, but the rest of the disciples, that's very important to understanding the dynamic. This is the 3rd time that they've seen Jesus following his resurrection, not the first. So by this point in time, they've had some experiences. And this is the 3rd time that they've encountered Jesus. What does that tell Peter? What does that tell the disciples? It tells them that I still love you. You see, when you have failed someone, and in Peter's failure, it wasn't just letting down or making a mistake. It was letting down something. When you feel that you have made a mistake which has damaged a relationship, what's one of the first things you want to know? Do they still love me? They still love me. If you're raising kids and they get in trouble and you have to, punish them in some way. And everything's all done, what do they want to know? Do you still love me? Husbands and wives do this, particularly us whiny husbands. We do that stuff all the time. You still love me? My wife hates it when I do that. Whine. You know what I'm talking about. Do you still love me? Well, 3 times now, Jesus has gone out of his way to appear to these guys. So when Peter realizes who it is on standing the shore, he jumps into the water and rushes to Jesus. Why? You would think he would do just the opposite. You would think he would not even want to see Jesus coming, that he could no longer look in the eyes of Jesus. The memory of what he had done, the failure he had committed, the fact that he had denied his friend when he needed him most, would all get in the way, and Peter would in no way, shape, or form go rushing to Jesus. You see, one of the things that was happening over these few days that helped to restore people is Peter, as well as the other disciples, they began to realize, because of the repeated pursuit, that Jesus still loved them. And that no matter what was the case, whether I had fled or denied him, nothing was going to change. I still want a relationship with you. And it culminates in this moment when he sits down for breakfast with them. Because the meal represented, and particularly in the ancient world, meals were places where relationships were fostered, relationships were built, and this meal represented, I still want to be with you. Nothing you've done cancels out that one insaliable fact that I still love you, I still want to be with you, and I still want to do all the things we used to do. I'm happy to go fishing with you. I'm happy to eat breakfast with you. I want to be with you. The relationship continued. And through these early encounters and the fact that Jesus pursued them so relentlessly, they began to realize he meant it. He meant it. He still loves me. He still cares. He still wants to be with me. The relationship isn't over as I might expect it to be over. Now, that's a very, very important step. When you have failed somebody and they know that you failed, one of the first things we need to know, do they still love me? And particularly when we feel in some way, shape, or form we failed God, we want to know the answer to that question. Does God still love me? In the early stages of Jesus' post-resurrection appearances, it was all about reestablishing that fact. I still love you. And the thing that proves that I still love you is I still want to be in relationship with you. Now, all that said, there's more to the story. That's an important piece of knowing that we're still loved even when we've failed, even when we've let somebody down. Knowing that they still love us is an important part of getting through that process and moving on. But Peter needed more than that. Remember, Peter was the one who not only fled from Jesus, but denied that he even knew Jesus. And so we're going to pick up the story in a private conversation just between Peter and Jesus, as we begin to realize that Peter needs a little bit more than the average person to break through here. After breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, Peter replied. You know that I love you. Then feed my lambs. Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, Peter said. You know that I love you. Then take care of my sheep. Jesus said. The third time he asked him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time. He said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, then feed my sheep. Jesus said, as I tell you the truth, when you were young, you were able to do as you liked. You dressed yourself and went wherever you wanted to go. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and others will dress you and take you where you don't want to go. Happens. Some of you are closer to that point than others. It happens. Jesus said this to let him know by what kind of death he would glorify God. And then Jesus told him, follow me. When we have failed someone, when we have failed God, our first question is, do they still love me? But there's still another issue that Peter is dealing with that Jesus needs to help him through. The question isn't whether or not Jesus loves Peter. Peter needs to know that he still is capable of loving Jesus. But right now, there's a big question mark on that one. You see, there is the guilt of the failure, but there is also the shame of the failure that carries with us. The shame that says, I'm not the person I thought I was. I'm not as capable as I thought I was of doing what I knew was right or needed to do or thought I could do. And that shame, and we begin to sit in. It's very, very easy at this stage to say, I'm really glad that someone still loves me. But it's another thing to begin to realize, do I still have the capability of loving them back? And that's very, very critical for Peter to experience a full sense of renewal and restoration and work through all the aspects of what easily might be determined the epic failure of all epic failures. Denying the Lord that he had committed himself to follow to the grave. And at this point in time, Peter's question, does Jesus still love me, has largely been answered. But the question mark remains, can I still love him? And will he still let me love him back? It's one thing. Is this going to be just a one-sided thing? Because prior to this, that's the way it existed. And so Jesus begins to get at that issue by asking Peter a series of questions. And it's very interesting how he decides to go about doing it. He doesn't say to Peter, Peter, I know you still love me. That's not going to cut it. What he does is invite Peter to say for himself, I still love you. Now here's what's interesting. In each case, Peter says, Jesus, you know the answer to this question. All Jesus is doing is giving Peter an opportunity to verbalize it. Why? Because Jesus needs to hear it? No. Because Peter needs to hear those words coming out of his own mouth. 3 times, Peter denied knowing Jesus. 3 times, Jesus gives him the opportunity to say, I love you. Even though Jesus knows the answer to this question, even though Peter knows that Jesus knows the answer to this question, God, or Peter, or Jesus, whoever, Jesus still says, do you love me? Why? Because Peter needs the opportunity to verbalize that. This, as far as I know, Jesus never got his degree in mental health or counseling or psychology. But this is kind of mental health 101. Peter's greatest need here isn't to be told that he's capable, that he loves Jesus. He needs the opportunity to own that and communicate it on his own. And if he doesn't, there's no reason to say it. You realize Peter at this point has nothing. It's all been exposed, nothing to hide. He's denied Jesus. Jesus knows he's denied them. If he really doesn't love him anymore, so be it. There's no reason to be in denial at this point because his whole life has been laid out there to be exposed. And so all Jesus really does here is give Peter an opportunity to verbalize that which Jesus knows is still true. You see, no matter what we've done wrong, no matter in what way, shape, or form, in our hearts and our minds, we feel we may have failed someone or failed God. That doesn't mean that we are forever incapable of experiencing his love again or expressing to him our love for him again. And so Jesus here deals not only with the guilt, does he still love me, but with the shame, can I still love him back? God proves to Peter, yes, Peter, you can. This thing you've done that you think is so irreparably severed any future hope for a loving relationship, a two-way relationship, it's not irreparable. Peter needed to know that. And you need to know that, and I need to know that. Not only does God still love me, but am I still capable of loving him? And Peter's story says, yes. We got news for you. If Peter could, you can too. So can I. Now, there's one other facet of the story that's important to understand to bring us more or less full circle. Peter needed to know, the other disciples needed to know, despite their failings, does God still love me? The answer is yes, and it's proved by the fact that Jesus continued to pursue them and enter into relationship with them. Second question is, am I capable of loving Him? I thought I was until I made this big mistake, and now I've got this big question mark. Jesus says, yes, you are. I know your hearts. And I just know, despite whatever mistakes you feel maybe prevent you from doing that, you can get through this. You are capable of loving me. You still love me. Your failure in no way, shape, or form is something that excludes you from doing that. So we all need to know, does He love me? Can I love Him back? Third thing. Can He still work through me? You see, when Jesus recruited these initial disciples, apostles, as time went along, it became clear, at least partially clear to them, that He was grooming them for something. He was preparing them for something. It was a few people that He taught at a deeper level so that when He had departed this earth, there'd be a core group of leaders who would be there to lead and shepherd this church that was about to burst on the scene as more and more people heard the message of God's love through Jesus Christ, began to be Christians, and more people. And Peter was one of those people that Jesus had specifically chosen to help lead, guide, and shepherd this young church. And so for Peter's remaining question is, okay, Jesus, I'm glad you still love me. I still love you. Can you still use me? Am I now put on the shelf? Is my life now without significance because of what I've done? And so when Jesus asked the question, Peter, do you love me? Interesting response. Well, then feed my sheep. Feed my sheep. Take care of my flock. Take care of those that I prepared you to take care of. In other words, here's the thing, Peter. What you've done and what you think you've done has not canceled that out as either. The potential for your life to make a difference is in no way, shape, or form lessened by what you've done. In fact, in many ways, it's enhanced. Because every person that Peter meets who has a story to say, if you knew what I'd done, you would not tell me that God loves me. Peter has a matching story. And he's able to say, oh, yes, I do. Here's what I've done. And here's what I've discovered. I've discovered that He still loves me. I've still discovered that I can still love Him. And I've also discovered that He can still use me. Despite the fact that in my mind, I've done something that would seemingly cancel it all out. Interesting at the end of this passage. I'm not going to go into the whole stretch out your hands and people are going to address you and take you where you don't want to go. There's only so much time on Sunday morning. So chew on that one. I'm not going to talk about it. What I'm going to talk about is how Jesus concludes this conversation. Comes up to Peter, walk with me, has a private conversation. And at the very end, the last two words that Jesus leaves Peter with are these two words: follow me. What were the first two words that Peter ever heard Jesus say? Follow me. Follow me. At that point in time, it was like Jesus punched this gigantic reset button. And there was a sense in which everything at this point had changed. Obviously, Peter had spent a lot of time with Jesus and witnessed His miracles and that knowledge. He'd witnessed now the resurrection, and these encounters had forever changed his life. And these encounters had defined who he was as a person. But as much as everything had changed, it was also true that nothing had changed. And when Jesus returned Peter to the original invitation, as we're starting, we're exactly in the same place as we were before any of that stuff happened. God gave Peter to hit the reset button. And He said, we're right back where we were. Just follow me. Just follow me. That's His invitation to you and to me. I realize, folks, we blow it. I really do. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes accidentally, it's a reality. But Peter's story, yeah, maybe we don't fail in quite the dramatic way, but Peter's story reminds us when that happens, that God still loves us, God still pursues us, God's not going to let us get away. We are still capable of loving Him. And God still wants to use us. God still wants to endow our life with a significance. You go, my life, me, with that mistake, with that blemish on my record? If somebody ran a divine background check and that stuff showed up on there, I would never be invited to be a leader in the youth group or whatever. That can't, okay, not with God. Not with God. I realize sometimes our mistakes irreparably damage a relationship in this world, and it can take a long time, but here's the word that Peter's story gives us. Never is that the case with God. Never is the case with God. He never gives up. Never stops loving, never stops giving us the capacity to love it back, and never stops giving us the opportunity to live a life of significance in serving others as well. That's all true because of the grace of God.